Zen at the Sharp End. Welcome to the podcast about how to turn difficult people and relationships into your best teachers. I'm Mark Westmackett, a Zen Buddhist teacher, mindfulness teacher, and ex-professional astronomer. This is a podcast to go along with my book, Zen and the Art of Dealing with Difficult People. In each episode, we'll be exploring different varieties of people, relationships, and situations that we find irritating, difficult, or painful. Together with a number of Zen friends, I'll be discussing how the practices of Buddhism and mindfulness can help us see our difficult people as troublesome Buddhas, our greatest teachers. This podcast is sponsored by Zen Minded. If you get a chance, check them out at www.zenminded.uk. You'll find a curated selection of Japanese homeware and incense, a perfect match to your meditation practice. We're also sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers convenient and affordable therapy online. In my opinion, meditation and psychotherapy both offer valuable avenues for exploring our suffering, habits, and stuck areas. A while back I spent 3.5 years meeting twice a week with a psychotherapist when things had become acute, and it felt like the help he gave me was really transformational, especially when supported by my regular meditation practice. If you're interested, they've extended an offer of 10% off your first month of therapy at betterhelp.com/zen at the sharp end. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/zen at the sharp end. In this podcast, I'm talking to Evan Williams. Evan is a professional French horn player in an operatic orchestra in Germany and part of the Zenways sangha. So in this interview, he talks about how the time spent in his early career doing auditions for months on end taught him the value of staying in the present moment when he's playing music, and also maintaining what in Zen is known as the beginner's mind, that ability to stay like you've never done it before, approaching things as a beginner. And he goes on to discuss how troublesome auditions, conductors, composers, children, traffic have all combined in various ways to produce fantastic opportunities to practice mindfulness and Zen and to explore his troublesome Buddhas. At one point, Evan talks about the effectiveness of a Zen energy practice called Ah-Un breathing at helping him pause and center and focus before a concert after a particularly blustery journey to get there. And as an accompaniment to this episode, I've recorded the art and breathing practice for you to try out for yourself. Oh, so welcome, Evan. Thank you so much for being willing to come on our podcast today and talk to us about your troublesome Buddhas and your sort of background. Maybe that would be a good place to start. Like, what got you into Zen and meditation and in the first place?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Mark. I think it definitely the interest started. I wasn't, right into it straight away, but I definitely was curious back when I was doing my bachelor's studies. I'm a professional French horn player, and I play in an opera orchestra. We also do symphonic music as well and ballet. But when I was doing my Bachelor of Music, sort of majoring in French horn, I guess you'd say, I had a teacher who had done quite a bit of it himself, and he'd chatted to me. He was very friendly, very open. He just told me how much it had helped him with his music and also with his personal life as well. He'd had a lot of challenges. And so that was just sort of the initial moment. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I was living with my older brother at the time, and he also had a few books written by the Dalai Lama on his bookshelf. Anything that I thought would motivate me or help me to get to the next level or to have more belief in myself, those kinds of things. And I think I, read one or two that might have said, try meditating. And it sort of, went from there. And then I went over and did further studies in Germany. And then I dated a girl briefly who was, had Japanese parents. She'd grown up in Sydney. I'd actually met her in Sydney, and then she ended up in North Germany as well. But she was, I'm pretty sure she still is. This is it called Nichiren Buddhism?
Oh yeah.
So they just chant and they don't sit. There's no sitting. I thought it was interesting, and I did it with her, and then we sort of went our separate ways.
Previous to that, when you were reading these books, you'd just been reading about it, is it? Not
Yeah,
sort of starting actually.
mainly.
Mm,
Well,
mm.
yeah, I mean, it was sort of, I'd read one and it'd say, yeah, try meditation, and I would do it, but not in a disciplined manner for
Okay.
months and months.
Mm.
I was lucky after a year, I managed to win a contract in an orchestra through an audition. Um, and then I just sort of always had in the back of my mind that my teacher had really benefited, my teacher in Australia, that is, had benefited from his meditation. So I just
Mm.
kept reading different books. And then,
And had you met anyone else in the music world that this had connected with them?
yeah, I'd heard from my teacher in Germany that one of the other professors, who was actually pretty well known, is still a very well known musician in German in music circles. That he was a Buddhist, and I hadn't known that at
Mm.
all. He was all I knew was a very friendly, down to earth guy, particularly for a very well regarded musician. Yeah, and then 2010, I moved back to Australia. At that stage, yeah, it was once again my older brother was doing yoga 2 hours from every day from Monday to
Wow.
Friday at this amazing school called the Yoga Arts Academy in Melbourne. So I tried it out, and then I thought this is amazing, and I did the same thing for the 5 further months or something that I was there. I did about 10 hours a week. So,
Wow.
and
Mm.
that was amazing, just to think, wow, this can really change you in the long term.
Mm.
And then I went back to Germany to start the other job, and that was interesting. A phase of just sort of basically, okay, wow, I finally got this job that I spent. I did 5 years of doing auditions as my main focus, and
Wow.
then once I finally got the permanent job back in Germany, there was a relief. And but then 6 months later, after the trial, I remember feeling, oh, but this hasn't brought me the happiness that I thought it would. The feeling of we have these illusions that once I finally get that, once I finally
Yeah.
get that, I'll be happy. And so I started, reading the odd book about meditation again, and
And in those 2 hours a day, the yoga, had that included still practices, or that was all moving stuff?
that was, yeah, there was Shavasana we lay down at the end, but
Mm.
that was for 10 minutes or 15, I can't remember. But there was at least an hour and 45 minutes of
Yeah. Yeah.
asanas, of the movements. And then my brother had mentioned before I left Melbourne that he'd done this a 10-day meditation retreat. A man called Goenka. You might,
Mm.
you've heard of him. Yeah,
Yeah, Goenka,
he
yeah,
was
yeah.
he was a pretty amazing fellow. And so I ended up doing a 10-day course in Germany, the Goenka course. Yeah, and it was really wonderful, and it gave me a feeling at one point during the 10 days of sitting in silence, I felt some joy arising from within, and I don't think I'd experienced that before, not to that
Mm.
extent. There was joy from music, but you hear and feel the music, and it seems a normal activity. But this idea of, wow, you can have joy that just comes from within you, that was
Mm.
new to me.
Kinda spontaneously.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
so that was great. And I practiced. I took Goenka's advice for as long as I could. He was an amazing teacher, I think, in many ways, particularly someone without a lineage, a
Mm.
layman, teaching it so beautifully and so well. It's impressive. And also the generosity of offering it all for free. It was all donation based. You could,
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately, I found it a bit tough. The sort of, I mean, maybe he did it with a reason. He said you should always meditate an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And it might have been his goal, thinking, well, if they aim for two and manage one, that's still great.
Yeah.
So I actually pulled it through. I actually went through with it for a while, and until I decided I wanted to do a master's on top of my full-time job. And we'd had our second child, and it kind of unfortunately fell by the wayside.
Well,
And
I mean, we've got one child, and wow, even finding time to do 10 minutes of meditation is a
yeah,
challenge.
well, yeah, that's right. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets easier when you've got kids. The initial, it turns your life upside down the most after the first child.
Yeah.
Now I've got three, and I'm happy that I managed to meditate 25 minutes a day as I
That's
now
a real
teach with
achievement.
friends.
Yeah.
Um,
And so are you still in that position that you got back then? Like
yeah,
right now in the
yes,
orchestra? Yeah.
yes,
Mm.
yes. I eventually, after I stopped doing the Goenka Vipassana. Basically, I got into Zen through a few books in the Soto school until I stumbled across the Breakthrough to Zen online retreat with
Okay,
Daizang,
yeah.
2010. Anyway, yeah. So music is a great way to make a living, and I try to remember that. However, there are lots of troublesome Buddhas that can make it frustrating.
And just maybe before you go on to that,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
what the concept of how a difficult person can be our teacher for one of us. Where do you
Yeah.
think that came up? You know, in along your twisting and turning path of practice. You know,
Oh, yeah.
as a
I had
as an
it
idea.
wasn't so specifically to do with a person, but I think at one point, reading books about Buddhism and just trying to stay motivated, at one point I kind of realized, that difficulty is character building. and
Mm, mm,
um and yeah, I guess I didn't think it had to be a person that I think at one point I realized that doing all these auditions, even though it was really hard work and quite stressful, that it had one thing I'd certainly had to develop was patience because
mm.
um, when I got to Germany, it was really strange. The first audition that I did for any kind of professional work, I had no expectations. I just naively went in and I happened to win. And that was the first contract I had. And then the second audition I won in Germany was about 5 years later. So there was one initial success that just
Mm.
bit of a fluke in some ways. I mean, you might, yeah. It was quite funny when I called my professor and said I won the audition. He said, "Really?"
I
Like,
suppose having that fresh mind, no
yes,
expectations, can be a
yeah.
real.
The sort of the beginner's mind, the Suzuki
Yeah, yeah.
Roshi thing, is really important actually in music. And that must have helped me that day. Then I went through 5 years of auditions with a lot of ups and downs before I won the permanent job. So in orchestras, there's you've got troublesome conductors, of course, troublesome colleagues. It's all about teamwork. So
Ah,
if anyone who's played high level sport, particularly professionally, I imagine professional footballers are on the field, they try to be professional, but I imagine in training, some of them think, geez, I hate this guy or that. I'm sure there's a lot of that. We sometimes, we've got a pretty friendly orchestra, but there's no
I
orchestra
mean,
in the world.
do you have a sense that some orchestras are more friendly than others? Or
Yeah, yeah. Should be careful what I say here.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
And is it the conductor that sort of sets the, I don't know, the energy or the
definitely some
ethos?
of that. I've thought about this actually with conductors. Sometimes I think about, just I guess from reading books about Zen, the interconnectedness of us all.
Mm,
Being a conductor is actually a hard job, and particularly in terms of job security. Here in Germany, they'll tend to get a 5-year contract if they're lucky, if they're good. Um, and that's if you're the general music director of an opera house. Um, and then if you're lucky, if you're doing really well, you might get another 5 years, and then 15 years is the max.
mm,
That they never really get more than that because if they
yeah.
do, then they could actually legally claim they're entitled to that job for life.
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
and and so they never extend more than 15 years because then it's bad idea. But so it's pretty stressful, and they're trying to forge their own career often, particularly when they're younger and don't have the experience. And so sometimes I try to see their perspective, and they're running the whole show. I'm in charge of my part as a horn
Yeah.
player, but it's just one part. And they're in, and when it's opera, it's not just the orchestra, it's the singers and trying to
Yeah.
get them to sound together when there's they might be standing at the back of the stage and then there's an acoustic issue. The singers have to feel like they're singing way too early for it to sound in time with the orchestra out the front.
Oh, see, yeah,
There's
yeah.
acoustic issues, there's all kinds of tricky things. And so sometimes I think about how tricky their job must be.
Mm,
um, their contract might be running out, and they're worried about getting the next one. Sometimes I think that they might have a different conditioning to me, that they might have grown up with a really strict upbringing, where being very, very firm and strict with people is the way they're used to doing things. I had a horn teacher like that once, and I only lasted with him for a year because it was
mm,
different to my conditioning. I
mm.
found out because somehow my parents knew a guy who lived in the same street as his family, and this guy told my parents, yeah, that their parents were very, very strict with all of those kids. And so
Yeah,
there's different conditioning, the way people
sure.
naturally go about things. Yeah, thinking about this the other day, I also thought there's a couple of Zen techniques that I think have helped me with some troublesome Buddhas in the orchestras. And one of them is specifically Rinzai, the energizing the hara that Daizan talks about in practical Zen,
Mm.
or the Ah-Un breathing. I'm not sure what the Japanese term is for it, but
Sure, that's it. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
interesting. There's actually a music psychologist in the States who helps people train for auditions and stressful situations, and he's taken a similar kind of breathing to this hara breathing. And in some of his books, he describes it. He calls it centering. And I'd read these books a few years back and never quite got the knack of it. And he got this technique from Aikido, from the
Mm.
Japanese sword fighting. I don't know anything really about Aikido
Mm.
other than looking it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah, yeah.
But I imagine Aikido is influenced perhaps by Rinzai Zen with the breathing.
It's got a very strong Zen sort of
Yeah,
back,
yeah. So
thread.
anyway,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
read these books by Don Green about how to lengthen your breath, how to feel centered in the hara, in this area sort of
Mm.
below the navel. But once I read Practical Zen, I got better at it. I got the hang of it. And then one day I had a difficult piece to play at work, a troublesome composer who didn't realize that on the horn, if you give them no break for about 20 minutes, and when you're just playing the accompaniment, and then suddenly there's a big, beautiful horn solo, it's very hard for the muscles if they haven't had any recovery time.
Ah,
And I remember that day in the afternoon, I was looking after. I've got two lovely girls and a boy, but as with all kids, there's sometimes fights. And then the
yeah.
neighbouring girl was over here, and then suddenly the girls were screaming, and I decided to air them out a bit and took them to the playground, and then thinking I better get them home. I've got to go to work now. I remember, do you think? Then one of the kids was like, "No, I'm staying right here. I'm happy now."
Oh
So I
gosh.
tried to drag the kids home, and
Yeah.
then better get to work. Said to my wife, "Thanks, darling. I'm off now. Good luck with the kids." And I drove off, and suddenly realised, I haven't got any food, and I haven't eaten for a couple of hours. I'm going to need some energy for this piece, because I had this piece with the
Yeah.
solos that weren't difficult by themselves, but in the
But
context
yeah,
of the piece, quite hard. And then I thought, oh crap! So I stopped off at the supermarket, grabbed some bread or whatever, jumped in the car. I just about had the engine on, and then I saw a car in front of me reversing back, and I just thought, oh, I slammed the horn on, and this guy bashed into me anyway. And I thought, great, just what I need. Running late, got a difficult piece coming up. Anyway, and so I got out of the car to talk to the guy, and he'd already started driving off.
oh gosh.
So I was yelling, "Stop!"
Yeah.
until I realised he was actually driving around the corner to park behind me, thinking
Ah,
perhaps that maybe he thought that he would be blocking less traffic. It was actually the opposite. He ended up blocking more traffic. Anyway, it was quite frustrating, because that was towards the end of the pandemic, and it was the fourth time that someone had actually banged into either our family car or the little car. And so we were so sick of this insurance stuff, even though we weren't at fault.
yeah. Yeah.
So I went off to work after talking to this old guy who was probably, I don't
Oh,
know.
that's a big
It was,
lead up to
yeah,
going
yeah,
just
exactly.
to going to work. I mean, there's all
When you
sorts of
already
stuff.
know it's going to be a challenge, and then you have a challenge
Yeah.
in the afternoon, it makes it more interesting. And so I got there with about 10 minutes to go, and quickly tried to warm up my muscles. As a horn player, it's like being an athlete in many ways.
Mm.
And then I spent 2 or 3 minutes doing this hara un breathing, and it got me really centered. It got me really. I managed to just let go of the frustration of the car accident, whether or not I was still annoyed at the kids or whatever. I don't know.
Mm.
But
Mm.
I let go of a lot of just distracting emotions that weren't going to be helping me in that moment. And I remember feeling really comfortable with what I had, been feeling a bit nervous about. So I think
Wow.
that
Wow.
kind of breathing is. I love the title of the book, Practical Zen. I mean, it's incredibly practical. It's a great
Yeah.
title. It's an amazing book, and I think Daizan chose an excellent title, because that's exactly what it is. Yeah, and
So
I think,
there's the kind of all the kids stuff, and then the car crash, and then not having enough food in the car, and then maybe being a bit late, and then
yeah,
there's I'm just going to do a little bit of like kind of be purposeful breathing and kind of bringing myself into my center. And
Yep.
maybe, and there's something there around not just centering and grounding, but also kind of drawing the energy into the area, which is going to give you the power for the
Yes.
blowing, for the horn music and things, and
Yep.
then just straight in
Yeah.
to the orchestra. Is it?
That's right. That's right.
Mm.
Once I started playing, there was no time for any more
Mm.
special breathing techniques. It was just all
Yeah, just
staying
do.
present.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I think I think sitting zazen, I'm not sure if it's if I'm good enough at it yet that I've improved my presence on the cushion so much that I'm more present at work. But definitely, being a musician, being in the present moment is absolutely critical.
yeah,
In performances, even more so than in rehearsals. Um, and I think, yeah, I had one other situation with a difficult conductor where I think there was a bit of flooding, and I was running late because I wasn't aware that certain roads had been closed. And I had to call management and say, look, I'm sorry, I can't guarantee I'm going to get to the performance on
yeah,
time. These roads have suddenly closed. They were very nice and said, yeah, we'll tell the conductor. And I got into the parking lot, ran upstairs and got out my instrument, getting ready to go on stage. And then management said, sorry, conductor would like you to go and see him in his office. And this was a conductor. This was a guy who used to. This is quite a long time ago now. This is not my job where I am in Germany because I've got very nice conductors here. But this was a kind of a passive aggressive guy who used to do this now and then to invite you, or to no, not to invite you, to instruct you to come onto his turf and talk to
mm,
him. And when I got there, he said, "Yeah, I heard you were running late." And he must have known that brass players need to warm up their lips. I had about 7 minutes before we were going to go on stage,
yeah,
and then he decided to say, "Yeah, the performance the other day, this little bit here, you were a tiny bit late." Um, and it was a challenge. I felt he was intentionally making life more difficult, and because he knew that, if I'd been in his shoes, I would have been happy if this horn player would have been on time at all, because that was the reason I
yeah,
called. I
right,
wasn't sure I was going to make it on time, and I actually just wanted to warm up my lips for 2 minutes and then play. I think when I ran from this guy's conductor's room, and they always have these fancy rooms with a nice sofa and a beautiful grand piano, and just and so I ran back, and then I was getting ready to go on stage. I might have done a little bit of deep breathing, some and I can't remember, but I remember thinking, now is the time. Let go of the anger at the conductor. Stay
mm,
present, no matter what. Be present. I thought, I cannot let what's just happened, the situation with the roads being closed and the situation with him,
yeah,
I cannot analyze whether or not he did it on purpose. I have to be present and in the music. And if I make a little mistake, even then I have to stay present. And
yeah,
that's really critical, because all musicians, no matter how good, occasionally you're going to make a mistake at one point. It's how you deal with it. It's not
yeah,
if you.
right, right, right. It's not what whether you'll make a mistake or not. It's what you do with that. Yeah. Mm.
Exactly. It's, can you act as if it just did not happen?
And I think there's something there around if we can stay 100% present with what's arising right now, how can you be angry about something that's happened before?
Yeah,
Like and maybe the music helps. Like this is
it
something that you
does.
have to be 100% focused on, and it brings us right into the moment. And if we've got like the leftovers of something that happened before coming in, then it's blocking us from being really present.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I
Mm,
that's what I was trying to do, was completely let go of this anger. How could he, knowing
mm,
that I was running late and it wasn't
mm,
necessarily my fault, how could he knowingly ask me to see him about something really pedantic that was from 3 days ago?
mm,
Um, I had to let go of all of those thoughts and put my energy and my focus completely into the present moment, which was the music.
mm,
So that's what I
mm.
had to do. And yeah, it was a stressful situation, but I think just understanding that it was critical that I let go of it straight away.
Yeah,
Perhaps sitting in meditation is, having been sitting years in the years leading up to that moment, perhaps that was helpful, having had that experience with meditation.
Yeah. So one last question then.
Oh, yeah.
All the various people that you mentioned have caused, issues and problems and things.
Yeah.
Now, would you be able to? What if I asked you, could you see their Buddha nature? What would you say to that?
Um, yeah. Good. Thanks. A good question. I think that I I don't think about the term Buddha nature a lot, but I think about interconnectedness and
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
all in this together, and that we might have our own thoughts, and that on one level we're separate, on another level there's no difference at all, and it's just the duality of our thinking that causes this illusory separation. So I think with difficult people, I can see that when they're angry, they're struggling,
Mm.
and that we all struggle, and that we all have anger from time to time. And I can see, yeah, in that sense, I see their Buddha nature in that they have the same emotions and the same desire for happiness that we all have. They might not think that practicing meditation is the way for them to be happier. They might see it purely in terms of their career, which will put a lot of pressure on that. If you've got all your eggs in that one basket.
Mm.
And I imagine for young conductors without families and stuff, if they're still young and they're trying to forge a career, I imagine they put all their eggs in that basket and put a lot of pressure on themselves. And so I think,
Mm.
yeah, is that an answer
Yeah.
answer your
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. I mean, basically, our Buddha nature is one of deep interconnection and interdependence, and that we all arise together, and that the difficult situations we find ourselves in arise like with all of us in it, right? It's not just one person causing us difficulty. It's this whole situation and the interaction and everything that's come before, and all their conditioning and your conditioning all arise into this moment to create that, I don't know, spark or that problem or whatever. So it's kind of like being able to see that perspective.
Exactly. That's right. All these things coming together to create this one stressful situation. Exactly.
Mm.
Yes.
And that, that we can
Couldn't agree
see
more.
the Buddha nature even in that. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That's right. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, that's probably a good place to finish. Thank you so much for bringing your lovely examples and telling us a bit about. So it's probably quite an unusual profession, or at least horn playing. I think is probably quite a rarity to find someone like yourself.
Yeah. Well, look, it's my pleasure to talk to you. Absolutely. I hope there's some things. I think having a difficult conductor is the same as having a difficult boss. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I hope that it's not just a novelty topic, but there might be something interesting for other
Absolutely
people out
applicable
there.
to all of life. Yeah.
I think it is applicable to a lot of things. Yeah, it's an interesting profession for sure, and I have no regrets about having gotten into it.
Great. Thanks very much. Yeah.
My pleasure, Mark. Great to talk to you.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review and a star rating on whatever platform you use. And do recommend it to others, because we all meet difficult people, and each of those meetings presents an opportunity for learning and growth. I also have a downloadable video course in how to deal with difficult people. Head over to my website for more information, markwestmaquette.co.uk. Thanks for listening.